Hello and welcome to the Street Crime UK YouTube channel. Please don't forget to like, share, comment and subscribe. Today we're going to take a look at the notorious history of the Chalkhill boys. The Chalkhill estate is located in the Wembley area of northwest London. It is one of the largest council estates in the UK, built in the early 1970s around the same time of both Stonebridge and South Kilburn's estates. The design was based on the Park Hill of Sheffield, which is why it looked somewhat different as opposed to the other two estates recently mentioned. The redevelopment process began in the early 1990s due to heavy drug dealing and crimes being orchestrated by gang members. The high-rise towers were being knocked down, new rise towers and council houses were being constructed. The redevelopment process had been officially finished by 2009, but prior to 1997, the estate was revamped and looked completely different. A lot of Jamaican Yardie gang members took refuge amongst the Chalkhill estate. This is because the estate was so huge in terms of size and scope, it was easy for drug dealing to be implemented. Police would have a rough time tracking down criminals due to how the estate would be set up. The high-rise towers were connected, so criminals would go from one side of the estate to the other without touching the ground floor. This is what led to the redevelopment of the estate from the earlier stage, as opposed to any other area in northwest London at the time. Due to a mass amount of crack cocaine being distributed through the estate, for many years, Chalkhill had been given the nickname Crack Hill. Around this time, prominent members of the estate consisted of main figureheads such as Gregory the Black, who was the boss around that time, Suede, Double G, Benji, Forbes, DW, Bigger, Winston, Carlos, and many more. During the time when most places in northwest London consisted of high-rise towers, a few prominent members from Chalkhill, Stonebridge, and South Kilburn estates would get together and form a commission known as the A-Team. It had nothing to do with anything else other than strictly organised crime. A few Yardies and British-born members had family members from these different estates and would often meet up to distribute drugs amongst themselves. Most Yardie members went to jail and got deported and banned from the area due to internal beef and the knockdown of the high rises, which made it harder for drugs operations to flourish. Around this point of time, the prominent members of the estate were Gavin, Big French, Kizzy, Murray, Dirty Daps, Rudley, Jay, the Twins and many more. This generation of members would later inherit the crack title and call themselves by two different names, being flip-flopped, such as Chalkhill Mob and Crack Hill Boys. Chalkhill was all one, but there were two different sets in the estate around this time. Due to a heavy Somali population, the Malis would often come together as a collective to beef rival area Kingsbury. In 2003, young prominent senior members of the PRC gang were given bans and lifetime ASBOs for their reckless behaviour. For many years, PRC would go into Chalkhill's estate and harass the public, even going further to commit crimes such as theft, brutal assaults and stabbings for the thrill. In a small run-down corner of northwest London, fear has disappeared seemingly overnight. Vince Cunningham's wife is no longer afraid to step out of her front door after dark, and the old woman in the flat around the corner does not have to be escorted to her front door when the gangs are about. No one drug deals in the car park flats where people used to live in terror. No one mugs the residents or urinates on their doorsteps. This sudden and extraordinary change was the result of a unique experiment in Neasden, which seen 7 local males aged between 15 and 27 which had been terrorising the neighbourhood. Police say the gang regularly carried knives and drugs and had been convicted of more than 100 offences between them. but now the gang have been banned from the streets of Chalkhill area in a first mass antisocial behaviour order ASBOs in London. The order covers the largest area of any ASBO so far issued in Britain, to make sure the gang members do not dare venture into the streets where until recently they caused such havoc. A leaflet has been delivered to local homes and firms showing their photographs and detailing the areas from which they have been excluded. The results have been dramatic, one local said. They were absolutely terrorising the area. I'm just glad they were removed peacefully. However, serious doubts have been raised about whether such banning orders do any good in the long run. Professor Tim Newburn, a criminologist based at London School of Economics, said, "There may be a respite, but the likelihood is that it is temporary rather than a solution. There seems little doubt though, that the residents whose lives are being made a misery of are much more delighted." One father of four, an IT consultant who lived in the area for 18 years, said, "If this thing can stop them, then it's the right thing to do." The language and shouting that used to come out of their mouths was terrible. They would throw stones at people and it was awful. Almost all the residents would only speak if they could remain anonymous. The legacy of fear the gang had made on the residents. One elderly woman, who lived alone, said, "We have suffered, but it is much quieter now. They used to break windows and write graffiti everywhere. They used to spit all over my front step. It was disgusting. I had to clean it up in the morning and it would make me feel sick." Cab driver Vince Cunningham, who was 67, was one of the few people to talk openly about the terror the gang had inflicted. The old lady who lives in the corner, "We used to walk her in because she was frightened," he said. "My wife was too scared to take the rubbish out at night." You notice them trafficking drugs. You are fully aware of the shootings and stabbing which accompany that. But it appears that the climate of fear the gang instilled, rather than criminal activities, caused the biggest problem. Bobby Thomas, the Brent councillor in charge of housing, said, "They would intimidate you, even if you didn't do anything. Their presence and attitude was far worse than if they had committed a crime or gone away." The ASBO was introduced in 1999 is what was hailed the government's zero tolerance policy. Mr Thomas said the move by Brent Council and the police to apply for them in the case of this gang was meant to show the gang their behaviour would no longer be tolerated. Brent police say crime in the exclusion zone has fallen by 25% since the interim orders were served on the gang in April. But the IT consultant said the mothers of the three of the gang went door to door recently asking residents to sign a petition in their support. The families are considering a legal challenge under the Human Rights Act, claiming their privacy and family life has been infringed. It was pretty intimidating with them standing at the door. You don't really have much choice but to sign. Professor Newburn questioned whether the ASBO addresses the underlying problem. It is quite clearly important to respond to an antisocial behaviour and to seem to respond to it as well. There is no doubt people who are on the receiving end of it wish something to be done about it, but it is somewhat misleading to allow them to believe that a simple punitive response is going to be their salvation. ASBOs are perceived as a punishment, but I'm not sure punishment is the solution. We need to think very carefully about what impels them to behave in these ways, and intervene accordingly. Crucially, it needs to have some fairly intensive educational element to it. In 2009, Press Road member Stunts, real name Sean Stanislas, had shot a prominent CHP member, Gavin Green, in Harrow. A month later, Stunts was seen in Stonebridge estate by a CHP member. He would be shot at point blank range, dying on the estate. Rumour has it Jason Green, known as Coke, was the alleged goodman, who was Gavin's brother and was done out of retribution. This angered members of Neasden and Kingsbury as they vowed revenge. This led to more tit-for-tat shootings amongst rival areas. Throughout the rest of the year, there were numerous shootings done by prominent members of CHP, SKM and PRC. CHP was involved in a few incidences, but the back and forth was mostly done by the other two areas, SKM and PRC. In 2006, the following year, Coke had been driving his kids to school. He came out of the car and he was approached by PRC members. They shot Coke in front of his two kids in broad daylight amongst bystanders. Members of the PRC fled from the scene. One eyewitness recognised one of the drivers. He was later arrested and charged, despite not pulling the trigger. The Wembley father was shot dead outside his home by a masked gunman in front of his two children, the Old Bailey heard. As screaming youths scattered for cover, Jason Green, who was 30, was gunned down as he sat in his car. His 8-year-old son was sat beside him, and his 4-year-old boy was in the back seat. The family were on their way to school when the gunman struck in a busy street at 8:20 AM, the court heard. He then sped off in the car as horrified passers-by, many of them children, looked on. Jurors heard the gang of armed men in two cars lay in wait for Mr. Green outside his home in Bowater Road in Wembley on July the 18th. When another gang member walked past and gave the signal, the gunman got out and opened fire. The mother of 5 told the court she had witnessed the murder and hid behind bins with her children to escape the gunfire. Christopher Tossant Collins, who was 19, is accused at the Old Bailey of being one of the shooting party. It is claimed the victim was gunned down as part of a tit-for-tat gang war. Jurors heard how on February 2005, his brother Gavin Green was shot in Harrow. It is rumoured that 24-year-old Sean Stanislas was responsible for the attack. Sean Stanislas was murdered himself on the Stonebridge estate. Both Gavin and Jason Green were suspected of involvement, but were released without any charge by police due to insufficient evidence. Christopher Tossant Collins of Drewent Rise, West London, was sentenced to 25 years for the murder. In 2007, during this time in London, most gangs throughout the city would flag different colours bandanas. The areas consisted of estates such as South Kilburn, Stonebridge and Monk's Park. Brig French was a close friend with TOS member Smalls, which is what led to a current generation of Chalkhill reconnecting. All areas affiliated with one another and would revive back the A-Team name. This is because around this time, prominent members from different areas started rapping and wanted to take the name in a different path, as opposed to it being only street orientated.
You know my whip game proper, cause I whip came proper. Got sick game that twist brains, no need to call a doctor, I'm the pharmacist.
This was done roughly around the same time as their ops, forming their own commission known as the SMG. St. Raphael's, Kensal Green and the Mozart State were involved. After all alliances had been formed, more drama had emerged from different parts of the northwest around this time. There were a lot of tit-for-tat stabbings and shootings on a daily basis. In 2008, a couple of members of the Marleys were both arrested and charged during a drug raid on the estate. The police seized thousands of pounds worth of drug money and possessions which were inside the flat. The pair of drug dealers had been sent to prison for a total of 12 years following the raid on the Chalkhill estate. Conroy Roden, of 27 of Bathurst Gardens, Kensal Green, and Farhad Hassan, who was 24 of Lawrence Avenue, Stonebridge, were both found guilty on drug-related offences after a 5-day trial at Harrow Crown Court. The pair pleaded not guilty to possession of cocaine and heroin with intent to supply, but the court heard how on October the 30th, police had raided a house on Windsor Crescent, Chalkhill Estate, and found the men desperately trying to get rid of the large quantity of drugs out of an upstairs window. Officers searched the property and discovered £1,000 in cash strewn over the bedroom floor, electronic scales and brown and white powder, which when was tested found out to be heroin and cocaine worth a total of £26,000. £12,000 in cash was also found hidden in shopping bags, but Mr. Roden and Mr. Hassan denied having anything to do with the drugs or money. Detective Constable Stuart Outred of Wembley CID said, "The supply of drugs causes misery in communities where dealers openly deal on the estate and in public parks. It also has impact on the victims of crime, whereby users will commit burglary and robbery offences to support their habit. Drug dealing is also seen by many aspiring youths as a way to earn easy money and brings with it disputes which this borough has witnessed the after effects of when a deal goes wrong on a regular basis. The message needs to be sent out that if you deal drugs, you will face conviction and lengthy jail terms, and you will be brought to the attention of the community so they know who you are." Mr. Roden was found guilty on 2 counts of possession of Class A with intent to supply and was jailed for 8 years. Mr. Hassan was also found guilty on the same 2 charges and handed a 4-year sentence on June the 16th. In 2009, there were heated tensions going back and forth between both Kingsbury and Chalkhill. This caught the eyes of the public and the Brent police. The Marleys would often go on rideouts in broad daylight with TENS members on pedal bikes to look out for their ops. Some would go as far as to arm themselves with knives and stab innocent people for the thrill of it. In 2010, senior members of the Marleys would later go on to be charged and banned from their estate. Members of the notorious gang who conducted a 12-month reign of terror against the residents have been banned from the Chalkhill estate. Police obtained antisocial behaviour orders for the 5 unruly youngsters who were all members of the Chalkhill Blue Boys. Members were told by officers that over the last 12 months the tearaway teens had been responsible for causing criminal damage and theft at a nearby primary school and had trespassed and behaved antisocially in housing blocks, and they had also threatened and abused police officers. Members of the gang had also committed offences including assault and burglary and had stolen from Asda supermarket in 40 Lane, from which the members are already banned, police had said. Faisal Youssef, who was 17, Hashi Ali, who was 18, Zachary Dowd, who was 17, and Awali Mohammed Hassan, who was 16, Kaiba Efran, who was 17, had all been ordered not to enter the area designated by the police, which covers most of the Chalkhill estate. If they behave in an abusive or aggressive manner to a police officer or a member of public, or if they associate in the company of more than 2 Chalkhill Blue Boy members at any time in the borough for the next 2 years, they could be arrested and charged. Those members of the gang who live on the estate are allowed to come and go from their homes. However, they have been given a restricted route which they must take to leave the estate. Mr. Hassan, Mr. Daud and Mr. Efan were also barred from Asda and its car park. Sergeant Parag Gore of Barn Hill Safer Neighbourhoods Police Team said, "The youths self-named themselves the Chalkhill Blue Boys, and they caused significant antisocial behaviour within the Chalkhill estate. The gang has sought to intimidate the local area and the police officers who patrol the area. They have disrupted the quality of life for the residences and the businesses." Councillor Lincoln Beswick, lead member of the Crime Prevention and Public Safety, said, "I fully support these ASBOs. We should be intolerant with any such behaviour. This is a clear message. Don't behave or you will lose your liberty." That same year, there would be a lot of back and forth goings between the TFL and the Marleys. Also, a prominent member, Murray, will start to make music more consistently. Here are a few of his tracks.
Over you.
Like magic, I make guys disappear and come back as different. Yeah, ain't that tragic, ain't that funny. Dudes get gas, keep thinking that their shit hard, I make that runny. I'm hotter than the spot where they take crack funny. This is what I plan to do. Have my niggas bang at you. Make the pump, make you jump like you was a kangaroo. Murder him, hit him up in Burger King. Heard you got a little name, but I ain't ever heard of.
There were incidences outside Kingsbury High School involving gang members from both crews, assaulting one another, even going as far as using a range of weapons such as baseball bats. Much life-term bans have been carried out, to the extreme level of violence being carried out as the bystanders looked onwards. The beef between both areas is still ongoing, only this time it is carried out by the younger generations. A handful of CHB members over the years have gone to jail for drug offences and weapon charges. Members of the gang stay operating behind closed doors instead of publicising their antics. The gang, for the most part, had been discreet for a short period. The estate was still a breeding ground, consisting of drug kingpins who would later be arrested due to police raids and intelligence. The police were cracking down on gang activity on a notorious Wembley estate by introducing dispersal zones. From midnight on Thursday, April the 1st, police were given extra powers in the area, stretching from the back of the Chalkhill primary school across the Blackbird Hill and Bridge Road up to the crossways. They can force groups of people loitering in the area to leave and not come back for 24 hours, and anyone refusing to comply can be arrested. The new powers will be in place for 6 months, until October, and the zone may be extended at the end of that period. Sergeant Parag Gore of the Barnhill Safer Neighbourhood Team, which covers the Chalkhill estate, said, "We are responding to concerns of residents in the area and are working with the council to resolve these issues. We hope that this dispersal order gives them the means to improve quality of life for the local community and businesses." This is what led to the downfall of the gang, as the most prominent members were banned and locked up. In 2013, Aaron Payne, a CHB member, had gotten himself into an altercation with a rival gang member. The following year, both had crossed paths once again, only this time the rival had a knife with him. He then stabbed Aaron multiple times to death. His accomplice then proceeded to assault him. He was on the ground. He died in hospital days later. Dean Gabby, who was 23, knifed 26-year-old Aaron Payne in the stomach for showing massive disrespect to him and his friends in Chalkhill Road, Wembley, on September the 4th. Mr. Gabby had already killed a homeless Polish man with a single punch in Neasden 4 years earlier and served 20 months inside for manslaughter. The Old Bailey heard that Mr. Payne was targeted after his cousin Simon Campbell and Tanshay Roach Johnson clashed the day before. Prosecutor Sally Hose QC said he was punched and kicked repeatedly and sustained a stab wound to the abdomen for which he eventually died. Mr. Payne was taken to hospital for treatment and was discharged from St Mary's Hospital in Paddington on September the 13th. He collapsed and died minutes later as he left with his father, Keith Payne. Judge Nicholas Hilliard QC sentenced Mr. Gabby to a life imprisonment with a minimum term of 25 years for the murder of Aaron Payne. He said, "You, of all people, were well aware that death can result from violence even when death is not intended. His is the second life you have taken. He had the greater part of his life ahead of him when he had the misfortune to cross your path. You have caused untold pain and sorrow." In 2014, David Hedlam was stabbed and killed by CHB members after an argument had broken out between him and a few members. Years later, 3 CHB members would later catch up with him and proceed to chase David through the Halsden area. They had stabbed David to death. All members were later arrested and charged for their part in the murder. The seriously ill father of a murdered teenager has still not been able to be told about his son's death, as it emerged the stabbing may have been linked to a trivial row on a football pitch. The church minister's son, David Hedlam, who was 18, was ambushed by 2 men wielding knives in the early hours of Sunday and chased for a quarter of a mile before he was stabbed. His father, Bishop Alonzo Hedlam, is the leader of the World Vision Apostolic Church of Jesus Christ. Mr. Hedlam has been in hospital for the last 3 months following a stroke, and a family friend said he had not yet been told of the murder. Outside the family home in Willesden, northwest London, the friend said, "That's the really sad part about it. His dad just had a stroke and he's been in hospital for about 3 months. I think he's just about ready to come home. At this moment, he doesn't know about it because nobody knows how to tell him. At one point, he had lost his own speech. The other day, I saw David walking down the road with his Father's Day card. It's so sad. I spoke to his dad about David the other day. He revealed David was a talented musician who had played the organ at his father's church services, with his brother Junior playing the drums. Friends also said the teenager had been targeted by men who took a dislike to him after a football match 3 years ago. I think they had an argument on the pitch with some guys about 3 years ago, and they have had it in for him ever since. I think they also had a fight on the bus, and it just carried on from there," a friend said. He said, "I thought perhaps they had stabbed him to scare him, but I did not believe the wound would be so fatal." He added, "They probably thought that they were just trying to make him scared. He was stabbed in the leg." Idris Daud of Anton Place, Wembley, and Tashay Ennis, who was 19, who formerly lived in Wembley and now lives in Langley, were subject to an ASBO when they stabbed to death David Hedlam. Under the terms of the 5-year order by Harrow Crown Court in October 2013, they were also banned from the Wembley area. During their Old Bailey trial, jurors heard how the pair and Eamon Coshin, who was 18, took a cab from Wembley to Harlesden and carried out their murderous act. They blatantly ignored the order by associating with each other and entering Wembley. Mr. Daud was also on tag for a previous offence at that time of the attack and had breached his curfew to carry out the murder. The trio chased and stabbed Mr. Hedlam in Drayton Road in the early hours of June the 29th. All 3 were found guilty of the unprovoked attack and were also convicted of grievous bodily harm with intent to relation to Mr. Hedlam's friend. At the Old Bailey, Mr. Coshin, who was just 17 at the time of the murder, was sentenced to life with a minimum tariff of 18 years. Mr. Daud and Mr. Ennis were given a life term with a minimum of 20 years. The motive for the killing remains a mystery, although the court did hear that on the day of the murder, Mr. Daud had uploaded a rap video on YouTube which featured him and Mr. Ennis. Part of a video showed Mr. Ennis bragging about stabbing someone. In 2015, Murray, whose real name was Michael Murray, who was the leading figure of the Marleys at one time in the estate, had been arrested and charged for wraps of cocaine found on him. The police also found thousands of pounds of drug money stored in his house during the raid, with fake bank accounts and documentation. The 6-month probe led to him facing further charges of possession with intent to supply crack cocaine and possession of criminal property in relation to the cash. At Harrow Crown Court, he was found guilty of possession with intent to supply crack cocaine and possession of criminal property and jailed for 3.5 years. DC Fiona Davison from Brent Police said, "This is a good result for the community of Brent, and I am pleased that a drug dealer has been taken off the streets. We will continue to target drug dealers and bring them to justice, those intent in breaking the law in Brent." In 2016, Big French made a return to music and began making tracks on a consistent basis. He would do a lot of features with his associates such as K Coke and many more.
Boys in the hill. Hey, they talk to me. This one's a crying. Lord have mercy on my soul. I had to get it on my own. There's numbers in my phone that I barely use, cause we all came up from the block but we have varying views. I thanked my mother cause she taught me how to tell the truth, but my father was a part of me I barely knew.
He would also go on to drop his mixtape within the following year, 2017, titled Game of Thrones. This mixtape gained recognition within his area and other areas associated with him. A new generation of gang members changed the name of CHB to A9, despite other members within the gang coming from different estates. Prominent members are Little Crafty, Mums, Go Get It, Little Shaq and many more. The estates still had their ongoing beef with both Neasden and Kingsbury areas, who are now known as OKB with the Press Road. In 2019, Big French had almost met his demise as he was inside his car sitting down the estate. A gunman saw him from afar and came running and was caught on CCTV. The shooting was done in retaliation for what had happened to Church Road rapper Nines. That same day, TOS and MP affiliate Smalls was killed by the same gunman due to the circumstances. The following couple of days led to multiple tit-for-tat shootings, with bystanders being unfortunately shot down in the head in a park as he bled to death. The men were charged more than a year after Craig Small, who was 32, was shot outside a shop in Harrow Road in Monks Park, Wembley, on the evening of 5th of July 2019. Mr. Smalls had been taken to hospital in North London but died shortly after. Mr. Small's mother previously shared a tribute to her son in July, stating that Craig meant everything to us. He was a loving son, a father, an uncle, and he was a peacemaker. He was the soul of the family. He lit up the room, and now his light has gone. Craig had a past, but he had changed his life for the better. He was moving in the right direction. His life had been taken senselessly. He did not do anything to deserve this. In 2020, the group A9 still consistently put out music on YouTube, with many different members taking the centre stage. Here's a few tracks of what they have done over the years.
I fly birds every day cause I can't get enough for this cash, get enough for this pay. Pissed they got my dogs in the cage, had the judge for their whole life away. One day things will be okay. I've just had enough for the struggle, but the struggles made me who I am today. I've just had enough for the struggle, but the struggles made me who I am today. Used to have books in the rucksack, now I got bricks in the rucksack. Man, I hit my first shot when I was 14. I was lost till the niggas started CMPs. I realised niggas start to envy, so I separated myself from plenty. Me being a hating ass nigga, man, that's dead like the cemetery. Trap so hard, I'm seeing hella like miss.
Brought down bricks, turned that to Liz. And I swear that the hotline blings like drizz. Coming like my chain and wrist. To the up, so please don't slip. Piss, chin man, down few trips. And I moved that white so quick, but now I got dark like my wife and kids. A9K, what, where? How much streets have I ching round there? And the school was never been fair, so I judgment's top and it's nice one clear. A9K, what, where? How much streets have I ching round there? And the schoolboy's never been fair, so I judge man's top and it's nice more clear. Jump out gang like rabbit, rapid, jump at the ride and slap it. If it's me then...
They would indirectly diss the ops, OKB, because of YouTube's guidelines on music. Lil Shaq is currently the most consistent rapper of this generation on the estate. Drayquan Patterson was seen in the Wembley area walking until he was attacked by a few OKB members. He was stabbed multiple times, which was seen on CCTV. 3 OKB members made their way back inside the car they came out of and drove from the scene. One of the members who had been allegedly involved in the brutal attack, Boniface Rexon, he goes by the street name BR. He has been arrested in connection to murder, but was released pending further investigation. Drayquan Patterson was chased down the road by the gang, with the teen desperately trying to get away from the trio in Wembley. But in the disturbing CCTV, the teen boy is then seen falling to the ground and set upon by the gang on Preston Road. The group can then be seen running to a black Ford Mondeo, leaving Drayquan for dead on the night of February the 18th. Young Drayquan was seen waving his arm and shouting for help as cars drove past before paramedics were called to the scene. He was rushed to hospital minutes later, but tragically died around 9 AM the following day. Police launched a murder probe into the horrific knifing, but no arrests have been made so far. Scotland Yard revealed that the getaway Mondeo was found later by officers, discovered burnt out in a close near to the scene in Preston Road, Wembley. DCI Leonard said, "We have been working intensively since Drayquan's killing to establish what happened on that Thursday night and find the people responsible. Our investigation has included detailed forensic analysis and an intensive search for and of relevant CCTV material. These and other lines of inquiry are continuing, and I can assure Drayquan's family and the local community of our total commitment to bringing those responsible to justice. I need to hear from any witnesses or anyone with information about this tragic murder. If you know anything that may be significant, please get in touch. I believe this car was used in an initial attempt to injure Drayquan in a collision on Preston Road. After the Mondeo had been driven at him, Drayquan ran away and was chased by 4 suspects who got out of the car before being caught and fatally stabbed. We have yet to establish who was using this Mondeo in the days leading up to the murder, and I am appealing for anyone who may have seen it to get in touch. This is a fairly large vehicle and quite old, so it would have been noticed. It is possible that the car appeared suspicious and wasn't familiar to local residents in the area where it was parked, or maybe people using the car have seen it behaving suspiciously. This car was clearly the key line of inquiry, and I'm asking anyone, in particular the people of North West London, to think carefully about whether they have seen this Ford Mondeo or who have been using it. Hedlam Nguendima went by the street name Tonks. He had affiliated with the A9 members. One day he was seen shopping in the Brent Cross shopping centre. He was then approached by OKB members. A fight had took place, which quickly escalated into Tonks being stabbed in front of innocent bystanders as they looked on in horror. The whole shopping centre was closed down and barricaded with armed police. Days later, OKB member BR had been arrested in connection to the murder of Tonks. Boniface Wrexham, who was 19, eventually pleaded guilty to the manslaughter of the 21-year-old Hedlam Nguendima at Brent Cross Shopping Centre in North London. In Crown Court, the committed gang member, who appeared in 4 music videos, was jailed at the Old Bailey for 14 years, with a further 4 years on an extended licence. Mr. Wrexham had previous convictions for robbery and having a lock knife and Rambo-style blade, the court was told. At the time of the killing, he was also on police bail of suspicion of another murder, the court was told. Following his arrest, he dropped the 6cm long lock knife down a drain at the police station, from where it was later recovered. Judge Leonard said Mr. Wrexham was a committed and active member of the Thugs for Life gang, and he had operated the gang's Instagram account, which featured people with guns, YouTube music videos with violent lyrics. The judge also referred to statements from Mr. Nguendima's family describing him as having a heart of gold. Mr. Wrexham of Kingsbury, North West London, had been due to go on trial at the Old Bailey for murder before pleading guilty to a lesser charge of manslaughter. The judge sentenced Mr. Wrexham to 10 months in jail for possession of a blade to run concurrently with manslaughter sentence. He ordered the charge of murder to lie on court file after the lesser plea was accepted by the Crown. Detective Chief Inspector Linda Bradley of Scotland Yard said, "There are clearly no winners in this case. The tragedy of Gideon's death remain with me throughout this investigation, and again today I wish to express the team's heartfelt sympathies to his family. Mr. Wrexham has also paid a significant price for what he has admitted was a loss of control. There is no doubt in my mind that his gang lifestyle was the reason for his appalling actions that evening. I also want to pay tribute to the security staff and management of Brent Cross Shopping Centre for their initial response to the incident and subsequent support through the investigation. We are very grateful for them. Thank you for joining us today. What are your opinions on the history of the Chalkhill boys? Please let us know what you think in the comments below. Thank you for joining us today. If you enjoyed this content, please don't forget to like and share. And if you're new to the channel and want to see more Street Crime UK content, hit subscribe and press that bell so you can join us on the next video. Thank you for joining us, and until next time, stay safe.